with us, even when we forget that you're with us. Thank you. This is a session on digital storytelling, and I proposed that I do this session during the boot camp, and several people said, no, I think you could do that on the Faith Formation Day. I think that this is actually an important faith formation topic, that part of learning how to tell our faith stories is I mean, we can think about it as an evangelism kind of topic, obviously, for Monday, or for just a pure skills sort of thing, or as a faith formation thing. So it's still gonna, I think, have a boot camp kind of feel. I'm gonna talk more skills than the sort of faith formative aspects of storytelling, but I'm sure that we'll have some of that right out of the gate, and then I hope that you all will, shout things out and cut me off along the way and help us think through this question of, like, how does it actually help us form our faith to tell the story and to use our words, as Nancy was saying on Monday. So let's keep that in the back of our minds as we go. But my basic goal is to just sort of introduce you all to this, I think, very rich and lively and kind of wonderful genre that has developed, that is sort of generally called digital storytelling. We're going to look first at a few examples from the more sort of personal but sort of faith adjacent, I would want to say, to some very sort of religious and biblical ones. And then I want to share with you a sort of a set of procedures for how one actually does this. As with so many of the products that we talk about at this conference, we see these things and we get a vision, and it's like, this is what I want my thing to look like, and it's really, really tempting to just dive right in. Day and I were talking about this at lunch the other day, and just start, and boy, am I a dive right in person. But as I'll keep saying, Julie Lytle's Faith Formation 4.0 book, she encourages us to think message, method, and then media. So what do I want to say? How do I want to say it? And then finally, start building it, start making it. And I think that's really wise. And I had the great opportunity, as part of a continuing ed project supported by the seminary, to be on a webinar on Adobe Connect, actually. And I dare say they had a few more technical difficulties than we have. It makes me feel good. On a webinar to learn their sort of digital storytelling process. And so without, I hope, giving away any of their proprietary, they're a nonprofit, they want people to learn how to do this, but I will share with you their 7 steps and then give you sort of my reflections on how this process might actually work for people of faith who want to get in on this genre. And then finally, at the end, I've got some resources to share with you. And I thought we might actually do some training. I know at least one person talked to me ahead of time about actually wanting to sort of see some of this stuff in action. And we'll do a little iMovie, and if we have time, also some video, which is what the Center for Digital Storytelling webinar actually used. It's a cloud-based video editing tool, and I was as surprised as anyone to find out that would be a robust and high-quality tool. But in some ways, I like it better than iMovie. So those are the 2 that I recommend: low cost, easy to use video editing tools for producing these digital stories. So that's kind of the trajectory for the next 78 minutes or whatever we've got left. So what I want to do first is watch a couple of these videos, and let's do a little exegesis. Let's do a little reflection on the effect that these videos have on us. Think about what you notice as we watch each of these. The first one is called Las Abuelas.
If it's a hard day, I make tortillas for dinner. If it's a special day, like a birthday or a friend coming to visit, I make tortillas for dinner. The smell of warm milk, working the dough with my hands until it's just the right amount of sticky, shaping it into balls and letting them rest before rolling them out. I make tortillas like my mom does. She learned from her mother, and so on, as far back as collective family memory goes. My grandmother was one of the Californianos, known in our family as Las Abuelas. These women considered themselves Californians first. My grandmother's aunt always described the Yankees as invaders, and we generally never pointed out that California is now a state.
So what did you notice about that one? Please, Susan. You never see the speaker. Yeah, yeah. What kind of effect does that have? Yeah, yeah. It's a little bit mysterious. Maybe the music adds to that a little bit. Yeah, yeah. Um, Sarah Beth. Yeah, yeah. Uh-huh, uh-huh. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, Sarah Beth said we may have seen the speaker in one of the photographs as a blonde baby, which also sort of breaks the stereotype. I also wondered if we perhaps saw her as one of the people on the beach. You know, I wondered that photo to me evoked a sort of sense of, mother and grown adult daughter having some, sort of heart-to-heart time. And both of those, I think, point out an interesting aspect of this sort of storytelling medium, which is that these photos do this work in an evocative but ultimately ambiguous way, which is kind of how the Bible works, right? And kind of how so many of our texts and experiences work. And so I think that's cool. Other observations, please. Yeah. Yeah. So even when the other photographs come up, come on in, even when the other photographs are going past, we see in the background the rolling pin and the tortillas. It's this constant sort of force, and I mean, there's a formational insight there, right? That our habits and our habits around meals in particular are really formative in how we learn and grow and come into our identities. Please. Yeah. Uh huh. Yeah, yeah. So there's some filmmaking insights that happen in all of this, right? And those have effects. So the point of view of the camera, does, I think, encourage us to think about maybe, we're hearing this from the speaker's point of view, but maybe it's our point of view. And if it can be the speaker or if it can be us, then it could be anyone, including everyone in this sort of lineage of I think mostly women, to hear the story making tortillas. Please. Oh, sorry. Yeah, please. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. There's like a there's a I think some of that comes from the point of view to thing too. Like, like as we're put in that place of thinking maybe it's us, it's like we're in that kitchen and we're feeling and we're smelling and all the rest. Yeah, that's great. Adrian. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I'm sorry. I've been forgetting to repeat the comments. Adrian was saying it was quite brief, but it was very reflective and told a sort of significant story with a small amount of words, and really puts us there. And part of why I'm so grateful for having the chance to have taken this webinar with the digital storytelling folks is that some of that is very much comes out of their suggested guidelines, and we'll get there. And they said, like, you don't need more than 300 words, and I think 200 words, in fact, and 3 minutes. And you'll see in these steps that they propose a desire to say more than we say and show more than we show, and to try to capture capture a moment and a feeling, and when we do that well, we tell much more than we do. I also want to say, and then we better move on. Another reason I show this one is that it's very simple in the technical sense, right? I mean, there's a video playing in the background, and then some photos fade in and out over it. There's a simple, reflective, clear, contemplative sort of voiceover, and there's some light music, and that's it. And so I find this a really compelling story, but it technically wasn't that hard to put together. The harder part is actually the composition and the writing the script and choosing the photographs and finding the moment, as they say in this group, and the technical stuff is just sort of icing on the cake. So that's another reason I want to just encourage everyone. You can do this. It's actually the other things that are the hard parts. The technology is getting better and better at staying out of the way. Okay, let's watch a very different one that is probably harder to do in a sort of DIY sort of way. Whoops. I feel like everybody is going to leave today, and our network is just going to breathe this like sigh of relief. um, Job well done, network. Oh.
It's possible that Tazria is the grossest and weirdest parsha in the whole Torah, universally dreaded.
They're just so good it hurts, right? That just, a question from the webinar?
And just a quick comment. Someone said, thank G-D, priests are no longer dermatologists.
Yeah, amen, amen. I completely agree. Wow, right? Thoughts? Day? Yeah, a really complicated and really boring text, really accessible. And how did it do that?
By sort of taking our worst nightmare and by putting it in contemporary terms in terms of skin breakout.
Yeah.
And making it clear that it was so much worse than anything we could ever imagine.
Yeah. Oh, humor. Yeah, humor was huge, and putting it in contemporary terms, right? It was, the joke about the priests being the dermatologists, and the pimple cream, the like acne begone, the funny little Hebrew joke. Just God, I mean, it's just like a joke a second, right? I mean, there's a lot there. Humor and a contemporary sort of approach, a big part of how they make a dreaded text really accessible. Yeah. Yeah, just the essentials. Yeah, here's the rash, here's the punishment, here's the sin that was supposedly associated with it, etc. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. That the voiceover just sort of evokes like essence of teenager, right? It's just so dry and so just kind of about how I'm feeling right now, just like very sort of understated and yeah, just lovely. What do you think the point of view, like sort of biblically, of the creators of this video is? Like, how would you describe the exegesis here and the viewpoint of the people who made it? Yeah. That the Torah is worth waiting through. It's worthwhile and relevant. Other thoughts? Please.
I'm reminded of how a lot of rabbis historically have done midrash. Kind of poked at the thing.
Yeah.
And in a way that almost can seem less than holy, but with a very holy goal.
Yeah.
Achieving understanding or opening question for everyone.
Yeah, so it was this kind of rabbinical move of doing a sort of midrash, of sort of telling the story around the story, and sort of poking at it and doing something that seems unholy and sort of making it holy. I think that's a really essential insight here, because when the thing starts out, you get the impression that we're going to get another like, oh, this piece of scripture doesn't matter, as you say, and yet that's not their perspective. They're trying to do a very holy thing here, and somewhere in the middle, right, there's this like shift, and they stop sort of seeming to kind of poke fun at the text and start saying like, here's what the text has to offer to us. It's really kind of subtle and just really impressive. I mean, Godcast is just, they just do amazing work. If you haven't heard me commend them in another session, or you hadn't see Sarah join us last year, the founder, hear me say it now, they're worth checking out. This is not, one that I would probably use in a Christian setting, right? They're Jewish educators, but although it's just so fun, maybe I would. There's and I don't know exactly when it happens. I think it's when they're starting to like put the woman behind the bars, and they're talking about the sin of gossip, and when they start to sort of bring in the meaning of the text a little bit, this shift happens, and it no longer feels like they're poking in an unholy way. All of a sudden, what they're doing feels very holy and reverent. And the storytelling folks talk a lot about finding that moment where some kind of turning point happens. And they do it here in this telling of a story around what probably reads just like a list of laws. Peter? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah. Nice. Yeah. They never sort of say it that way. Peter's pointing out like this probably resonates for a lot of teenagers, and I had horrendous acne, so I'm really surprised it didn't resonate with me that way. But I think you're absolutely right. Like they never sort of say like gossip can, if maybe you have acne and maybe you feel isolated in this way, kind of turning the point of it around a little bit, and it probably does have that effect. And I don't know if you noticed when I clicked on the video, it took me to the Godcast website, and before I could hit play on the video, I had to tell them what if I was a teacher or if I was a teenager, or if I was they are fiercely attentive to understanding their audience at Godcast, and wanting to serve different constituencies, different the marketers would say buyer personas, with the kind of content that they're looking for. I could go on about Godcast all day. So this is one more for us to look at, and this is Jason Chestnut. Somebody on the webinar in the hybrid faith formation session mentioned the Slate Project and Jason Chestnut's work. This one has a very different sort of feel, and it is called "Who Is My Neighbor?"
A legal expert stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what must I do to gain eternal life?" And Jesus said, "What's written in the law? How do you interpret it?"
Sorry, microphone. What jumped out in this one? What'd you notice? Please. Yeah. Yeah, so there was this splicing in of these contemporary movies. And how did that work for you all? So this is, I think he would probably make an argument that's fair use. He is, he's showing a very short segment, and that strengthens your fair use case. Copyright law is really complicated. There's no sort of cut and dry, that there's basically criteria, I think, around fair use, and you've got to sort of show due diligence in these different criteria. I think he would argue there he used a small amount. He's using them for commentary in some sense. It's not really commentary on the films. He's using the films to comment on the Bible story. So I'm not sure, he's on, I think, shaky-ish ground there. The reality is he's probably not going to get in trouble. Notice he goes out of his way to credit them. He's made a good faith effort in all this. So he goes for it and is doing fine with it. And I think ultimately it's not the end of the world. Chris, is this a related point? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, someone says, I don't agree with that fair use. Also, Christine says it worked well because I've seen all of the movie clips, and Brad says it jumped out when he was telling it that it was a biblical storytelling in the form of that network of biblical storytellers. And Christine followed, I think it would lose some of the context. I think it would lose some of the power if I didn't have the background context.
Yeah. I show this clip a lot, and that's definitely one of the things that comes up is, if you haven't seen the movies, you kind of lose something. I mean, there's a face value part of the movies, right? Okay, someone's getting beat up, someone's getting rescued, someone's annoying, but there's more to each of those. I've only seen one of the films, but I've had people tell me about some of sort of their interpretation of how the films are commenting on it. But you're right; it's easy to feel a little sort of left out. If you haven't seen them, my preaching mentor always says there is no cost-free sermon strategy, and there is no cost-free digital storytelling technique, right? You're gonna always gain some things and lose some things. I think this one is the most ambiguous about its effectiveness. And Jason does a ton of this stuff, and I think probably he's gotten a lot better. He's kind of renowned at this point. I think he does really nice work. But it's a mixed bag. Other thoughts on the cuts in particular?
I thought it was distracting.
Yeah.
I've got the value of putting the conflict from the biblical story in the contemporary setting. I got that. But I do know the movies, and as soon as they flashed up, it just brought back so much more than what the story was about that I found it distracting.
I think the consensus of the people I've talked to, if there's a consensus, it seems to be that it's maybe a little much and moves a little fast. It's sort of engaging and fun, but maybe not ultimately effective.
Compared to when he pulled his credit card out of his wallet, I thought that was a very simple gesture that conveyed a ton of contemporary relevance.
Yeah.
2 days wages, you got to think about that. But when he just pulled out his credit card and said, take care of it, I found that very powerful.
Yeah, that sort of carte blanche, as it were. I agree. I think that's a powerful move there. So let's double back. Peter, I think you had a comment. Yeah. Yeah. Nice. Yeah. So Peter's saying that the sort of urban context, the alleyway, the sort of side road out of the way, all of that evokes a sort of feeling. I wondered if there was something, especially like with the grass. I mean, it's sort of an interesting shot, or not grass, the leaves in the foreground there. It's sort of an interesting choice. I wondered if he's trying to evoke neighborness or neighborhoodness or something with the, you're right up against the hedge. Again, some might say that it's distracting. Others, it was an interesting choice. He makes interesting choices, and some of them really work and some of them don't, and some are mixed. Maybe, did you have something earlier? Sorry. Go ahead.
As far as the point of view with the hedge, it's a voyeur point of view. In on him at the
Yeah.
rather than, the images, when I hear the story, it's in church and it's
Yeah.
very civilized,
Yeah.
but that's not necessarily
Hmm.
Jerusalem
Yeah.
at the time. The other thing is my daughter.
Can I say that part first? So she was saying it's a sort of voyeur point of view. It sort of evokes something of the fact that Jesus told these stories in public, and they weren't necessarily respectable in the way that we hear them in church.
My daughter actually sent me this one because she really liked it, and I think when Jesus was telling the stories, he was referencing things that people knew, and most of the people who watch this know the Big Lebowski and know the self-righteous shallowness of the character who's always right. We know the Shawshank character. We know the story behind the crash where this guy is rescuing somebody that he just can't stand. And so it is a comment on the story.
Yeah, yeah. It's a comment on the story, and the probably the audience that Jason intends probably does skew toward knowing those films. This is their motto at this church is Christianity without the crap. That's gonna attract a certain sort of demographic, and it's probably more likely that folks have seen them. And I take those points definitely. Chris.
The last comment on this video from the webinar, Sylvia Miller-Mutia, who we saw a video from during Nuria's presentation, said,
cool.
I think it's an interesting example of intertextuality, like the Bible. The stories hold together even if you don't get all the references, but it is so much more richer when you do get the references and make the connections.
Yeah, yeah. Lovely. I like that. Yeah.
I just appreciated the Bin Laden and
Yeah. Yeah, Westboro Baptist. Yeah, yeah. Those to me, the things that really nobody said this, so I'll go ahead and say that to me, part of what's striking is his use of text. I thought a lot of the text and the editing is I think quite effective. The little explanations, in some of the places, because notice he's doing more or less, it's interpretation, it's not translation, but it's still more or less straight Bible. So on the screen, he's doing the intertextual work of describing the things that we need to know. The little interlude to me mostly works. There's a pause and we cut away and he says, this Samaritan thing was a big deal, right? This is how people felt about Samaritans. And then at the end, I never got that in this passage. The thing about, that's why he says the one who showed him mercy, because he didn't even want to say his name. I mean, that was a revelation to me when I and I don't know, if that's an accepted biblical position or not, but I think it's just brilliant. And the way that he captured that insight with the editing and the text, I just like it's really, really effective. I think it's a cool video. So I think this half an hour or so of watching these and exploring the way that we respond to them, doing some interpretation on both what we think the author's intent was and who cares what the author's intent was. Here's what it showed me, and here's what it here's what it said to me about these texts. I think this is really important as we think about how do we go about trying to tell some stories. So I'm going to do something that I have some trepidation about, and when I do this, I always go back and forth about whether to do it or not. This is not a faith story, by and large. It's a story that I told about a trip to a comic book convention in New York. What is useful about this is that I know more or less how difficult or not it is to do the different things that happen in the video, and so I can speak a little bit to some of that. And I know the process of what it was like to go through and do it. So I think the fact that we know the author's intent here makes up for the fact that A, it's not a faith story, and B, you've probably heard enough from me already. So I'm going to just go ahead and show it. And then this, if you didn't already realize what a nerd I am, here comes. This is the story that I told as part of this webinar project, and it's called Meat Grinder. My crooked spine protests at the morning spent in crowd. So there's my silly little story. And let me now back up and talk a little bit about each of the steps that the Story Center sort of suggests that you go through in order to do one of these. And again, I think it'll be helpful to have that one as a sort of touchstone. So the first thing that they say is own your insight. You want to tell a story, right? A story has characters and something happens to them or they do something. And it's usually valuable not just in a literal way, but because of some kind of meaning or epiphany or change or whatever. And the first thing you have to do to figure out how to tell a compelling story is to put your finger on what your insight about this moment that you're reflecting on is. So in my case, and I don't know how well any of this comes across, in my case, I was really struck by the, in theory, I went for, to see the recording of the show and to go to the convention. But the thing that was most moving was this few minutes over beers in a comic book store, where, it was pretty cool to get to meet them, but it was the profound experience of the event for me was being in this room full of gratitude. And so that was the sort of insight I was trying to own, that in the midst of all the craziness and all the sort of lights and whatever, what was a valuable sort of pilgrimage about it was, them getting to thank us and us getting to thank them. So that was ultimately like, what I was trying to capture in that. The next thing they say is own your emotions. You're telling your story. So think about and try to get in touch with how you feel about that story. How were you feeling when this moment was happening? How have you felt since? How has it, what is associated with those feelings, right? The little middle section, traveling from Manhattan to Brooklyn, the thing about the cult of the G train and all that, like, I'm moving there in a week, but I am pretty intimidated by New York. And like that part was about trying to like capture this thing of like feeling inept, and this guy's carrying a tuba and still playing a game on his phone, and and I can barely figure out which way this train is going. So that sort of set of imagery, does some literal work in the story, right? It like gets us from the convention center to the comic book store. But the emotions involved are these emotions about sort of alienation and otherness and outsideness and whatever. And so there are some. Most of those photos were black and white. I don't know. That may have just been a coincidence. Some of the images were mine, and some of the images were Creative Commons. So the ones that were credited at the end. I actually don't know. I submitted this somewhere, and I wondered if I was trying to get a remixing digital badge. Mozilla does a digital badge for remixing, and I actually think my Creative Commons attribution is not quite up to snuff because I don't give the specific Creative Commons licenses of the different ways that those people shared their stuff. So it should have been person's name, parentheses, a license, and probably which photo was it. Again, I think there was enough due diligence there that I don't feel too guilty about how I chose to handle it. And I didn't get any feedback from the Story Center folks saying that I had done something inappropriate. Anyway, so it may have been a coincidence that those were mostly black and white photos, but I think that actually captures this sort of emotion of the sort of empty drabness of trying to, and the subway is sort of a monochrome place in some ways, so it's sort of a gray experience. I don't know. So the next thing, I've spoken a little bit to this already on the Godcast one, but the find the moment thing. On the Godcast one, I really think that somewhere in the middle there is this moment where a change happens, and we realize, oh, this is not actually a hermeneutic of suspicion. They're not, trying to hold this text at a distance. They've just been sort of helping us resonate with it in a modern way first, have our sort of modern experience of it and sort of alienating. And then there's that moment where it turns, and all of a sudden that you get that they actually love this text and want to share with you the idea behind it. I think that's the moment in that particular story. I guess in mine it was somewhere in there. Walking into the comic store and having this. Yeah, I'm right on time. Yeah. So that was the finding the moment for me, at least. So these last few are a little more hands-on, right? Like so far, this has been purely conceptual. This is just planning. This is sketching. This is whatever you do to prepare to create or write or compose or whatever your creative process is. So far, you've just been doing that preparatory work. Here's where you start to actually kind of assemble some things. So they don't say this explicitly, but I think sort of after number 3 here is where you'd probably write your script. You've found the moment and you go. And again, I think that script is like 178 words, or I mean maybe it's a little longer. You could do a word count. The video has the script, but it's like shatteringly few. If you're verbose like I am, it took me a lot of drafts to get that down to. I mean, there's a sort of density to it, which I don't know. My impression is that it's sometimes a little hard to sort of follow because it's dense. But I think the density of meaning is sort of helpful. You know, you be the judge. But this is the point where you actually write and rewrite and really try to condense it down to something that's short and compelling. Digital storytellers, the center, basically said to us, your goal is to come in under 3 minutes. You know, there's a sense in which they've defined this genre, and I take their word for it that that's an effective length of story for something like this. Certainly, I know that in general on web video, most of the research says that unless someone has some buy-in already, if it's a TV series or a web series or or whatever, if you're just trying to get someone to watch a video in isolation, the chances they're going to watch more than 3 minutes are pretty slim. So I think that's a good length to sort of shoot for in general. So you've got a script, and now you see, hear, and assemble your story. So I basically had a script, and I was like, okay, how do I choose images that evoke all those insights and emotions, and gets the transitional point and captures something about this script. One of the things they worked with us a lot on this webinar is helping us get beyond literal images. So some of them, were literal, right? Like, okay, I'm heading to the subway. I'm coming out of the subway. I'm on the block. I was trying to sort of evoke the travel there, and so that was a pretty literal part. But others, were just the old time radio. When I started talking about old time radio, the first thing was that car. The car doesn't really have anything to do with radio per se, but it's like an old-timey car, right? I mean, even that's kind of literal. And mine, frankly, was a pretty literal story. There were some that were at least a little more symbolic, but it was really interesting seeing the other people in this cohort, seeing what they came up with and what images they selected. The Loss of Willis one was pretty literal too, by and large, but. It's part of the fun of this, and part of what Jason Chestnut, I think, is really good at, is thinking about the power of juxtaposition. That juxtaposing a very different clip or image on top of a biblical story can have a profound impact. And so they really said, like, what could you juxtapose there to sort of break someone out of what they might be thinking about your story? It's I think a big part of the seeing your story part. I'll say a couple things now about some of the technical stuff around this. You want high resolution images. You want to be able to like blow it up to a full screen and like have it not look grainy, especially if you want to do any zooming in. It's really helpful to have good high resolution images. And notice that we're working with video, right? And video is rectangular this way. So images that are rectangular this way are not super helpful. Like I had the one of Jim Henson that came in on like sort of just faded in a little bit on part of that. But by and large, I think that was my only vertical photo. Oh, probably the photo of me and the actor was also vertical, and you saw how much I had to zoom in order to get that to fit the frame of a horizontal frame. So horizontal photos, high resolution. Ideally, I really believe strongly that we should do these in as copyright compliant a way as we can. Ideally, either images that you own or Creative Commons images that others have given permission for this kind of reuse. I think that's the best way to do this, if at all possible. And there are lots of great places to. You can go to, I think it's search.creativecommons.com. Will let you search for all that media. There's good stuff. I'll say more about images and stuff when we do some how-to and some hands-on. Okay, hear your story. I will say that I think the person who narrated Las Abuelas is a much more gifted voiceover person than I was. Yeah, you can tell I have a sort of flat, measured, steady voice that is, good for certain things, not good for other things. It's not super expressive. I kind of wish that I had been able to capture some of the subtleties that first speaker got to. So you want to think about your vocal performance of the script in question. The thing that they universally told us to do, I mean, they basically said, please, please, please don't do this any other way, is get out your smartphone and use the voice memo. You've probably heard me say this at another workshop if you've been to one. The microphones in smartphones are actually pretty good mics. Go to a quiet place, preferably with some carpet, so the sound isn't banging around all over the place. Hold it 6 to 8 inches from your mouth and talk at your phone. That's a great way to record your voiceover. This is also, I think, one of the sort of vulnerable parts of this. I don't know if it's fair to my wife or not that I always tell this, but anytime she watches anything where I've done voiceover or anything, she's like, "You sound like a tool." Maybe. We're not all going to have all of the requisite skills to do these things perfectly, and just do your best and put yourself out there, and it'll be great. And you won't learn that you're actually really good at something until you try it. But it feels a little absurd to tell the story and then to have to hear yourself tell the story 50 gazillion times as you edit it. So do a few takes, get it to where you want it to be, and then just say, this is good enough, I'm going to keep going. You're probably never going to be thrilled with it, at least not the first time, and that's okay. So that's my advice on that. I think you do want to go slowly. I think especially if you've got a sort of density of language to begin with. I think if you go too fast, especially with images going too, there's a real risk of losing people. So take your time, unless it's appropriate to go faster for some reason, and it may be. Hear your story also includes, music or sound effects. Again, we heard some great music on the Las Abuelas. On Jason's, I think it was. I guess there was just the music in the clips, right? I don't think there was any other music, was there? Yeah, just the ones in the clips. But there was natural sound, yeah, and sound effects are really good too. You can also take your phone out and capture ambient sound in places that might evoke something. Like I thought about doing some some subway sounds for the train. I ultimately decided not to, but that could have been cool. The music I chose at the beginning when we were in the convention hall was kind of like upbeat exhibit hall techno music, kind of trying to get that sense of big crowded people being sold stuff. A couple of good places to go for sound, including sound that is licensed with Creative Commons and stuff. Jamendo.com has Creative Commons licensed music. I wish I could remember all the sound effects places. There's definitely SoundCloud, and some people post their like ambient noise and all that kind of thing to SoundCloud, and I'm assuming you can license it in different ways there. I think there were others that we learned about. If you're really interested in where to find other repositories of sound effects, let me know and I can dig out my notes. I might be able to find the other services. I will say don't overdo it. It's really, and it's true of almost any step here. There's a certain one of us, a certain sort of class of people, and I'm certainly one of them, who, like, if they can do more, they try to do more. And that is not necessarily a good instinct, I think, in this genre. I think understatement is good. Economy of anything is good. And so you probably, I think, don't want both music and sound effects and voiceover all at the same time. If you want ambient sound, cut the music, vice versa. Professional sound mixers, and we do have at least one of them at this conference from the New Jersey contingent. I was mortified after I heard he'd been at my podcasting thing. You know, they study for a long time to get good at mixing all of these things together. But by and large, you know, don't bite off more you can chew with your audio design. You know, use it sparingly. Okay, assemble your story. When they say that, they mean basically bring it all into video editing software and lay it out on the timeline and start to play with it. Add some transitions. You know, order your photos in the way that complements your story as you're trying to, or your video clips, or whatever the pieces are. And I'll show you a little bit of timeline in a moment. So you get the sense of what I mean in the assemble your story part. But this is the part that is really, I mean, many of these steps are time consuming. This one is the one that's both time consuming and a little technically, you know, challenging. One of the pieces of advice that they gave us, and I would definitely share it, is, you know, this is a great medium for perfectionists because you know, you can tell a really effective story if you really get the details right. But it's also a terrible medium for perfectionists because there are just so many details to try to get right. And as I said yesterday in the podcasting thing, we have a saying here among the VTS student body at exam time: done is better than good. If you can get to good, also that's fine. But sometimes it's hard to get to done if you're also shooting for good. And so, especially your first time out, you might just have to settle for done. There's a lot of variables, and it can be challenging, but it's also, again, for maybe a certain kind of person, it's also pretty fun, especially once you understand how to use the tool and you're not just fighting the tool all the time. I mean, that's not fun for anyone. But once you know how to use it, I think it can be neat to play with it and make those aesthetic choices and all that. And then finally, share your story. Don't go through all this work and not put it out there. You know, put it out there on YouTube, share it on social media. You know, look for occasions where you might share it with others. You know, I'm not going to convert anyone with my story about comic book convention, but you know, I did share it. I tagged one of the actors did watch it. I think he's the one who's like the social media manager who, you know, is their like brand ambassador guy. But you know, and like sent me a little feedback, and you know, it was fun. If I were more plugged into the fan community of the podcast, probably I could have gotten more people to see it, and some of them might have been into it. But you know, especially in our world, I think you know, the sharing part is just a must, right? And that's why we do this stuff. So that is a sort of quick trip through how they recommend going about putting one of these together. So what I want to do now is say a little bit about the technical tools, do a little bit of how-to. I think I'll do one live, and I think I'll show one recording, because I've got iMovie up and running here, but I don't have WeVideo up and running. So maybe I'll show you a recording of doing some editing in WeVideo. So those are the two platforms that I recommend to folks. There are others. If you subscribe to the Adobe Creative Cloud, I think it's called these days, then Adobe Premiere is accessible to you, and Adobe Premiere is awesome. It's got a bit of a learning curve, but I mean, there are people who like edit commercials and stuff in Adobe Premiere. Like it's a fun, yeah, and movies probably, yeah. It's a cool tool, but that means it has a learning curve. You know, usually that's how these things work, right? If it's really, really powerful, then it's usually harder to use. And WeVideo and iMovie, I think, strike a pretty good balance of enough power to be able to complete this sort of genre vision, I think, pretty well. Photos, little video, a couple tracks worth of sound, and to be able to get that to do more or less what you want, and they're both affordable. WeVideo, the free account only lets you export so much video per month. I think it's between 3 and 5 minutes, I think. So if you want to be creating a lot of video, you're going to have to upgrade. The upgrade is not unreasonable. And as I said, your Mac may have come with iMovie, although I think they maybe don't anymore. But it's a relatively inexpensive. They still do? Okay. So let me change the slide. Whoops. Uh-oh. Oh, good. So I thought now I would switch to, hang on, let me adjust this mic. Let me switch to the laptop here and try to show you how this thing kind of works in action. So this is iMovie. So all of you Mac users out there have relatively easy access to this thing. I forget if this is the absolute most updated version. I mean, one of the challenges with all of these tools is they get periodically re-released. I always say, YouTube is your best friend in the world of trying to learn how to use any piece of software. Google or YouTube, or just search in YouTube what it is that you're trying to do, and you can almost always find a video of someone doing it. The thing that gets confusing is sometimes they're doing it in a version of the software that is not the version you have. And so that can be challenging. The latest version is 10.0.8. I have help. Isn't it usually in? Oh, that's right. I'm still only partly converted. Oh, 10.0.8. Okay, so this is the current version. That's probably the best one to be showing, I suppose, which is great. Okay, so the paradigm here, over here on the left in iMovie is libraries. So up here is the libraries of all of your stuff, all the video clips and photos and stuff that you've imported. Down here, this thing labeled content library, that is built-in stuff or stuff from other programs. So you can see, I can click on GarageBand and probably whatever musical projects I've saved in GarageBand show up here. You can probably drop in all the built-in Mac sound effects, you just click the wrong thing noises and stuff. I don't know why you'd want that in the video, but you can bring in music from your iTunes library. If you're putting copywritten music into your video and you upload it to YouTube, YouTube will recognize that you've done that, and depending on how the owner of the copyright has told YouTube to deal with that, either they'll show an ad before your video and there'll be a little link to buy the music, or it'll come down, or there's a couple different things that happen. But if you do use copywritten music, do know that YouTube will know. The other thing that's down here that are really useful, I think, is titles. So titles is the filmmaking word for text on the screen. When you have titles down here, like on a newscast, when there's stuff running along the bottom, that's called lower third. So those are two filmmaking terms that may come up in the course of doing all this. What's really cool and what I want to demo here is how to do some transitions. So there are all of these built-in transitions. Less is more, both in terms of volume and in terms of what transitions you actually choose to employ. A cross dissolve, that's where you have two different images and one of them dissolves into another one. Here is trees in front of Half Dome dissolving into a lake somewhere with some mountains. I just did that really slow, obviously. If you were watching it in real time, it would be like, whoop. So that's a cross dissolve. The other thing that's here is cross blur. You might use this one. I don't use it very much, but it's okay. It sort of blurs one of them out and puts a blurry version of the other one, and then it comes into focus a little bit. So coming into focus, that's a metaphor, right? And so there might be some times when that's useful. If you're telling the story of the day after the eFormation conference, you might use a cross blur, when to show a picture of waking up in the morning or something. So some of these may have some sort of thematic, symbolic value for you, but I just want to mostly tell you not to use some of these. Mosaic. I guess maybe there's a time when you want to use that, but by and large, again, this is kind of people's PowerPoint transitions are like this too sometimes. It's just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. So that's worth doing. Oh, Ripple. Ripple's cool. So again, water imagery, baptism. Maybe a ripple transition is appropriate for some kind of baptism story or something. So that's the kind of thing to think about with the transitions. But the great thing about them is they're all pre-programmed in, and you can basically just drag them and drop them. Ginny.
Using transitions, if you select one, can you only use it just part of the video?
Oh yeah, you can use different kinds of transitions for different things. So let me show you how it will actually work. So down here, obviously this is the preview window of whatever it is that you're showing. Let me turn this. Stop turning away from it. This is the preview window, and it'll show you a preview of what you're editing. And then down here is what's called the timeline. So the paradigm here is that it goes from left to right, and stuff that happens early on in the video is on the left, and stuff that happens later is on the right. I wonder if in other cultures it goes the other way. Never thought about that. What's that? Oh yeah. I think that's probably true. No, I was wondering if if in a culture where they read right to left, I was just wondering if the timeline goes the other way. Interesting question. Okay, so the way to use any product, I'm convinced, on a Mac is to remember they're trying to make it as easy as possible, but I have to do it the way that they want me to do it, or I'm not going to be able to do it at all. So that's the Mac mindset. So for instance, it used to be that the best way to get images in were to have them in your iPhoto library, but iPhoto I think has gone away in the new iOS or the new operating system. Now it's just called Photos. Thanks. Honestly, my rule of thumb for this is just find the physical file and drag it in. That's working with these libraries and stuff over here. That's pretty much the only way to work with footage that you've imported. If you've got video, you go up to File, Import Media, and it'll bring stuff in from your camera, and it'll show up over here based on when you imported it. But honestly, if you're just doing a photo-based digital story, I think the easiest thing to do is find some photos, put them on your desktop, and drag them in. Let's see. So I had. This is all video up here. Shoot, I had a couple photos in already. Let's see, I've got a photo. This is a strange photo, but this is a photo that the host of the Reply All podcast drew for me. They said if you rate us on iTunes, one of our hosts will draw you a photo, or will draw you a picture. So this weird drooling man was drawn for me by the host of the Reply All podcast from Gimlet Media. So literally, I just found this photo on my desktop and I dragged it into the timeline, and by default, it pops in there for a 4-second chunk. So you can see it's there now, and if I hit play, okay, something's happening in the preview window, so there must be some kind of default behavior. The default behavior is what's called Ken Burns. So you've probably seen Ken Burns' many documentaries, the Civil War, baseball, jazz. There's a gazillion of them at this point. Ken Burns has this problem, right? He makes movies about things that happened in the past before there was video. And so what can you do to make that engaging? You put up a photo and you pan the camera across the photo. So you've got, 18th century woman, slow zoom in or slow zoom out, or pan across. Those are sort of your choices. So by default, apparently Apple has decided we think what you really want is to be like Ken Burns, and maybe you do, but that's the default behavior. Screen. So in this case, it's a vertical photo, so it doesn't look very good if you do fit. If I do crop to fit, then it crops the photo so that you get the whole photo and it fills the frame. I thought that's what it did. In fact, I'm pretty much positive that's what it does. I'm not sure why it's not doing it. Yeah, there we go. So there's crop to fit. Here's fit. And now, I'm trying to get it. See, this is the kind of thing that you just like. It's a medium where you just have to do a lot of putzing and a lot of Googling. It's been a while since I've done it. I could have sworn that you double-clicked on this thing, and it gave you the beginning camera position and the ending camera position, and you just adjusted them. And I honestly have no idea why it's not doing that. Okay, reset. Ken Burns. Crop. Ken Burns. What's that? I'm not getting anything. Okay, I have a plan B, which is that I filmed myself doing this before. I'm just going to play it. Oh, oops, sorry. Oh, I get it. Sorry, I forgot you're not seeing what I'm seeing. Timeline, adding a transition between them, and adjusting the animation effects that iMovie adds automatically when you add an image. The fill, which means it will actually crop the image a little bit. So here's me saying what I just said. Entire screen. So if I choose to do that, and now I leave this menu and press play, you can see we get 4 boring seconds of just that photo. Okay, let's make it less boring by bringing in a second photo. How about these seagulls? I will drag these over. And for the time being, I'm going to turn off the Ken Burns on that, and I'm going to crop to fill on this one as well. So I'll click out of this menu, and now we will get a slightly more interesting video of one photo and then a second photo. If I don't want quite such an abrupt transition between the two, I can add a transition. So if I go over to the content library down here and select transitions, it'll give me a whole bunch of choices. I don't recommend going too crazy with these. Some of them can get really distracting. Sorry. Classic that you'll probably recognize is what's called a cross dissolve. So let me just add a cross dissolve between these two. So I'm going to drag this effect down in between my two photos, so you can see it's moving them over a little bit to add this cross dissolve. So Ginny, literally every time you want to do a different one, you just grab a different one and you just pull it down to the place where you want to use that transition. And now you can see as I drag my cursor over that there's this sort of in-between period where we see a little bit of both images. So now if I want to play that from earlier, I can press play, and you see one faded into the other. So you can see that right now that cross dissolve is 1 second long, and if I double click on it, I can ask it to be longer. So let's have it be 2 seconds. That'll be a much more gradual fade. And let's try seeing what that looks like. Let's play. Really slow dissolve, and then we're at the second one. So in the story that I told, there were a couple of really slow cross dissolves from black to a photo, and that kind of gave the impression of light coming out. So there was one case where I was trying to sort of do a little sunset, or sunrise, but it wasn't a sunrise photo. It was just going from black or from sort of a dark image to to a very slow fade into the full brightness photo. So they're little tricks that you can play with these transitions. So maybe I like that, maybe I don't. For now, I'll leave that. But let's say we do want to gradually zoom in on this pair of seagulls here. So let me click back onto this photo and go back into that cropping menu. And let's click on Ken Burns. Again, you can see by default it zooms out at the start and then comes in gradually. Let's do that, but let's also take it a little bit off center. So I'm going to click on end, and I'm going to just drag it a little bit. So in addition to the zoom, we're going to get a little bit of pan as well. So let me click out of that. And now what we should see, if we go back to the beginning, is 4 seconds of boring single seagull, followed by our long 2-second cross dissolve. And that goes right into the Ken Burns, which is that gradual zoom and pan toward the right side of that photo. Obviously, those were arbitrary sorts of decisions. What you really want to do is choose these effects based on what you are trying to achieve in. So these are things I've said. So you get the idea of the different kinds of transitions and the different effects you can do on a single photo. You can do, these are your building blocks, right? Like the next thing I would do, actually probably the first thing I would have done for a digital story demo is to drag in the sound file of me telling the story, right? Because everything is going to hinge on that. So I would drag in. Sorry, I'm confused about which computer I'm on. I would drag in the sound file, and it would be the same thing. I just literally click on the sound file and drag it into the timeline, and so that would be going on down here. And I would pull the first picture in, and I would, I would pull the boundary, click on this photo and pull the boundaries of it left or right to make it shorter or longer. I would add a second photo, I would do a transition, and that's the way you gradually assemble the story, is just by bringing in piece after piece. Dave? How is the overall length of a particular photo that I drop in? Or by however much stuff is there right now. So like right now, this is an 8-second video. And if I drop in another photo, by default, that'll be 4 seconds of some weird Ken Burns thing of that photo. And now all of a sudden I've got a 12-second image, and it just, yeah. So if I do the right thing and start with dropping in the sound file, it'll be the length that you need, basically. Yeah. So you might add a few seconds of silence at the beginning and at the end, but you get the idea, yeah. I think you want to edit the sound and the photos. Oh, sorry, let me repeat the question. Is it best to do the editing ahead of time, or do you edit in this? I would do the editing ahead of time. If you use a fancy tool like Adobe Premiere, you can do a lot of that in stuff. Like if you double click it, it'll take you out to Photoshop, and you can do something in Photoshop, and you can import it back in. I find that stuff really complicated. If you're doing huge volume, there's probably some benefits to being able to do that sort of on-demand work. I think for amateurs like us, I think edit your stuff ahead of time, get it in there. If something doesn't look right, edit it again, bring it back in again. So I thought what I would do now is just show you the interface for WeVideo, so you can see. And I have a little visual joke ready for you here. So I logged in, and the first thing that popped up was, how likely are you to recommend WeVideo to someone else? Zing. So let me click in here and continue editing this project that I have. So this is in the cloud, right? I'm in Google Chrome, I'm in my browser, and it takes a second to load. It's pulling files off of a server, setting them out in the timeline, etc. Great, I'm going to close. You can do screen recording now in WeVideo, which is awesome. There are, obviously I made that video that I just showed you using screen recording software, and WeVideo will do that for you now, which is great. So this is what WeVideo looks like, and notice that it's pretty dang similar, right? Here's a sort of media directory, and there's not as much stuff because it's stuff I've had to drag in. So there's my media. I've got a bunch of photos here. You'll recognize photos from that project. That's all the stuff that WeVideo knows I have at the moment, and it's a similar sort of thing. I dragged in this clock. I dragged in a transition and put that transition between this subway photo. This thing, I haven't said this yet, the vertical line that moves around is called the playhead. So you drag it around, and wherever the playhead is what you're seeing in the preview window. So if I press spacebar, which is sort of the universal shortcut for play and pause, you'll see I've got some Ken Burns there, the transition into a still second photo. And I did it basically the same way. I dragged some things down and selected which transitions I want. The transitions I think are here. There's crossfade, there's cross dissolve, there's cross blur, wipe up, wipe down. There's that damn mosaic. It just won't let us free from. Somebody really wants to have that. So it's a similar sort of thing, and there's a point to be made there, right? Like the software is secondary to the tasks, and the people who design these things have decided these are the tasks that make sense. So time that you invest learning iMovie is not wasted for your ability to learn something else. You might have to go to a different menu to get a different thing. But the concepts are the same, and as we're building digital media skills, I think it's good to remember that time spent learning a tool is never wasted, even though sometimes we spend a lot of it and it feels like a waste. So I've got one more slide back on the other screen. And this is basically just a giant resource slide. There are more examples of great stories, some of which you may have heard about in other sessions, mine and others. I don't know why it's shaking. That's unnerving. Center for Digital Storytelling has a bunch that are just like the Los Willis, sort of pure genre that they've been teaching in Berkeley, California for 20 years or something. More stuff about digital storytelling, those guides. There are technical tutorials in some of these places, but really you can just Google what you need to know and click some videos. This handout, we've gotten really good feedback on this handout. We created this for VTS seminary students who were assigned in various classes this semester, digital media projects, and they have said that this handout was helpful. So I encourage you to check it out. It's got a bunch of different, that is really disturbing. Oh, got it. Okay, that makes me feel a little better. I was like, it's not me, right? Okay, yeah. Yes. So I commend that sheet to you. It talks about digital storytelling type video things as well as other kinds of video production. I hope that it will be useful to you. We're going to start in just a couple minutes outside. Sorry, that clock's a little slow, I think. Any last minute questions? Yeah.
With the audio in iMovie and WeVideo,
Mhm.
can you manipulate the audio the way you manipulate video, like fading?
Yeah, you can fade in and fade out. You can adjust. Usually there's like a line, and you just drop a little point onto that line, and you slide it up or down, and that brings the volume up or down. I could show you if you want to come up afterward, or maybe after the. I'll come back here after we're done with the worship, and if you've got more specific questions, we can do that. But yeah, you can do the audio in the same way, and you can always chop them up too. You can cut clips apart. You can layer things on top of each other, and it really is like a cumulative process where you just sort of build step after step. We made it, guys. Let's go pray.